Welcome to the Beautiful Game Plan podcast, produced by Focus Shift Films and sponsored by Welsh sports fans. I'm your host, Daniel J. Harris. I'm a filmmaker and entrepreneur working across sport, and I'm a huge fan of sports content. This podcast is my chance to meet amazing people who are doing amazing things in the sports content space and to share their stories with you in the hope that it inspires ideas. On this episode, we have the amazing Maggie Murphy, former CEO of Lewes FC, Director of Communications at Equal Playing Field, and host of the Expected Goals podcast. Maggie, welcome to the Beautiful Game Plan podcast. Can you give the audience a little rundown of your amazing career to date?
Oh, thank you, Dan. It's great to be on here. I don't know where to start with the career because, to be honest, the sports side has only been relatively recent. So I started off in the world of human rights and anti-corruption and international development. So I spent a lot of time overseas, living in places like Rwanda, Tanzania, Senegal. I was in the Netherlands for a while, Germany, Australia. You know, I was actually moving around a fair bit. But one of the constants was football. So wherever I was in the world, I always found a team to play for, to play with. And it's like that instant entry point to local people, local culture. You don't need to know the language. People know the language of football, and you know you can create team and friendships very, very quickly. But it also showed me, I guess, how lucky we are in this country to have the opportunities we do, because they're not equal around the world. And also, I think it showed me a little bit around fairness and who makes decisions and why it is that some people are allowed to play and some people are not. And so I think that drew me to think quite concretely about the football industry, probably around the time of FIFA corruption scandal back in, one of the FIFA corruption scandals, say maybe 8-9 years ago. And I think that really was quite significant for me because I looked around at the people involved and I felt like none of them would have cared to have met me, to have talked to me. I felt like they wouldn't be interested in the fact that I played football. I felt like they didn't serve me. They didn't care about whether I could play football at the highest level or these people did not represent me, and they were making decisions that didn't feel right for me or for women or girls in football. So yeah, at that point, I helped to set up Equal Playing Field, which is this brilliant nonprofit. It ebbs and flows depending on how much time and capacity myself and the other two co-founders have, but we were founded by setting a Guinness World Record at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. So, you know, it's a group of women from all around the world that now own the Guinness World Record for the highest altitude football match ever played. And I think that was like a real bonding moment because I was, meeting with women from all over the place, and we all had very, very common themes, even if the outcomes were slightly different. We were talking about opportunity or access to play. And yes, okay, we had a former US international player, but she also had challenges with opportunity. And a grassroots player from Nepal had challenges with opportunity. So we always grouped our things around opportunity, equality, and respect. And suffice to say that, and to keep it brief, I guess, my path crossed with one of the directors of Lewes FC around about that same time as the Guinness World Record match. And so that was in 2017. And Lewes had just decided to become the first club in the world to resource its male and female teams equally. One of the directors was saying, you should come over here and, run our women's side. And I was laughing because I was like, oh, no, I've got this career. I do this other stuff. I'm living in Berlin. Like, where's Lewes? So, yeah, but, I never look back. I'm always someone that thinks about, if not you, then who? And put your money where your mouth is. You're talking about the football industry needs to be better and more equitable. So go on then, figure out if you can do it. So yeah, I was at Lewes for 5 years, and just in recovery mode right now, as it became, I love Lewes to bits and I gave it my all. And I think we managed to achieve some great things. And I'm happy to pass over the mantle. I still go to the games. I've been to a bunch of the games already. I'm still an owner. Lewes is fan owned, so I'm still an owner of Lewes FC, and I'm thrilled with how they're doing, and all the rest of it. So yeah, that's the whistle stop tour, I guess.
Fantastic. You don't do things by halves, do you?
Well, I feel like if there's something, if you're going to go and try and rally together a whole bunch of angry women who are fed up with lack of opportunity, you might as well go and set a Guinness World Record and really put your stamp on it. Try and do something that no one's ever done before, male or female. So yeah, I'm sure a therapist would have a conversation with me about extremes, but it's definitely, I'm an all-in person for sure. Yeah.
Fantastic. And just want to dive into Lewes FC in a bit more detail. That's where we met. I came down, did a little bit of filming with you down at the club, and was able to see the amazing things you were doing, talk to some of the people around the club, and it was absolutely fantastic. So Lewes FC then, when you went in there, you hadn't worked in football before. Equal Playing Field is a charitable organisation.
Yeah.
You then go into kind of Lewes FC with a day-to-day running of a football club. What was that like to dive in there at the deep end and be like, okay, now I've got to figure this stuff out?
Yeah, I mean, there were obviously challenges. Like some of I think that sometimes people don't appreciate on the outside how specific and different the football industry is and how it runs, and like the rules and regulations from the FA that govern almost everything, how many times you breathe a day. So those things you can't learn through a book. They're not necessarily public. They're things that you just have to suck up and learn how to do on the trot. I was lucky to have an amazing colleague who's still at Lewes, Lynn Burrell, who knows everything inside and out. And so around to the FA and the rules and regulations and the licenses. And I think between the two of us, she was quite new to football as well. So the two of us were figuring it out as we went, but we had each other as a support system. I think the other thing is, though, that when you come into the sector, into sport from outside, you immediately are saying, why are you doing it that way? Why not this way? And a lot of the time people just like will stare back at you blankly, like why we've always done it this way. And for me, that's always like the biggest indicator that something can be improved. If someone says we've always done it this way, but can't tell you why, then I think that's your moment to go, all right, let's just break this down. So I found the football sector at times not particularly professional, not very transparent, not very strategic, not very intentional. Everyone's kind of just surviving. They're on cycles. Lots of people, when I first joined, I think this has changed. Lots of people working in women's football didn't really mean to be in women's football. They wanted to be in men's football, and they were just doing this until they could, or they were people who were parents, the parents of players, or just people that were kind of trying to do their best, but not necessarily like football executives. And I don't mean to say that football executives are going to run football better, because the football executives that I know as well are often very formulaic and not necessarily thinking outside of the box. So yeah, I think coming from the outside, a couple of things, if I can explain, because maybe I'm not making too much sense, but one of the first things that was clear to me that we needed to do differently at Lewes was have a strategy, like a proper business plan, but one that was not just about football, because I think a lot of places will have a football strategy, and not just about business, but actually the whole purpose of the club. So what do you stand for? How are we going to organize ourselves? What's our purpose? Who do we serve? And so by developing that strategy, I then said it had to be public. And that kind of, I remember speaking to the board about it, and there were some people on the board going, oh, are you sure maybe we can put out like a executive summary? Or, I was like, no, like, let's tell everyone what we're trying to do. Like, especially our fans, if we're a fan-owned club, let's tell the fans exactly what we're trying to do. It increases trust, it creates connectivity. And also, if we're doing something that if you have fans will frequently come up to you and say, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? You should be doing this. You just say, look, we don't have capacity. It's in the strategy. It's not in the strategy. This is what we're trying to do. And so every year we would also develop an impact report to say, and make that public as well, to say, this is what we got right. This is what we got wrong. This is what we're going to change. And I think those kinds of means of transparency and integrity are quite common actually in the business sector, but are not common in football. And I just feel like maybe coming in from the outside actually brings some really good perspective sometimes. And a lot of the time people would be like, oh yeah, that was a great idea. Why didn't we do it before?
Well, you came into it and you found a purpose, didn't you? And I think like most football clubs have been around for over 100 years, and there's well, we've always done it that way. Why would we do it differently? Rather than going, okay, what are we doing here? The world's changed, technology's changed,
Mm,
football's changed. How can we adapt? How can we evolve? How can we grow? And you've come in and gone like, look, it's not just about putting out 11 players on a Saturday or a Sunday and putting points on the board. We're actually a part of a community, and we've actually got these people that work in and around the club. We've got the opportunity to influence the community around us, the world around us.
yeah.
How can we do something that's a little different than you started with purpose? There's a fantastic book, I think it's Simon Sinek, Start With Why. Any business you start up, why? If you're doing something, why are you doing it? And if there's a purpose that's bigger than just, well, we're a football club, we play football, then you people will gravitate to there's more meaning behind what you're doing, and there's a bigger picture at play there, isn't there? And it sounds like what you've done
Yeah.
is taking your experience from your career up to that date, where you're looking at bigger picture things, you're trying to change the world for better, and you've gone, well, I've got a vehicle here to do the same sort of thing in football. Was that kind of a conscious thing, or is that just integral to who you are? You come in and you go, right, I'm going to make this the best I can make it, and we're going to look at how we're going to disrupt the industry, and we're going to look to do things differently and do things better.
Yeah, I think, I mean, uh, there's not, it's it's very mixed. So, Lewes is a special club. It was way special, before I came along. And the reason I went there was because it was special, because there were people there that were wanting football to do better, be different. And so that drew me in, and I was kind of like, okay, well, how do we actually do it? How do we take it from the theoretical to the actual practical? What are the things we need to protect? What are the things we need to change? But I think also the world of football is changing, and I think if clubs are not thinking like that, then it's not that they'll become obsolete, but they might lose some traction. So, go back 50, 100 years ago, people, yes, they are fans of the club that's on their doorstep. And yes, today you're most likely to be the fan of whoever your parents support, usually your dad. And so the thing is, note that now that people are moving around a lot more. So your dad might not live where he lived when he was a kid. And so he's moved around. So suddenly you've like chipped away a little bit at that connection. So you're not in the same town. You're not necessarily in the same town that your dad was from. And then the digital sphere means that you don't actually need to be on the doorstep of a club to know what they're doing. So suddenly you're way more interested in clubs that have a personality, have something to say, have something about them. Everyone knows Forest Green Rovers in England. They might not know loads, but they know that they're a vegan club. They know that they're the environmentally sustainable club. And I'm going to guess that there's probably loads of vegan athletes out there who love that club as a result, and maybe have never been, but are following or buying the merch or thinking about them. So I do think that clubs need to think about what they stand for and what their personality is. And I think there are some clubs that are doing that very, very well. And there are other clubs that I think are relying on the fact that they're from that town, or that they won the FA Cup in 1940, whenever. And do you know what I mean? I think there's only so much you can rely on heritage and location and being the biggest club in your town. I feel like now you've got to figure out, why would someone in the US start following you or be interested or buy a shirt? If you can connect to them through meaning and purpose, then, and that's not the only way. You could just have the player that they absolutely love, sure. But I think that you're going to connect better with people that trust you and find some kind of connection in what you stand for.
Exactly. It's you can't just rely on we are this club, we've been around for 140 years and we kick a ball around on a Saturday. There has to be more layers to the identity. And I was talking to the head of marketing at Cardiff City a little while ago, and I'm a Cardiff City fan. We won the FA Cup 98 years ago, and we're still banging
Mm.
on about it now. Do you know what I mean? But I said, like, what sort of club are we? We've changed our manager so many times in the last couple of years, and we've brought in so many players for those different managers, and we've kind of lost who we are. What sort of club are
But
we?
Dan, you've got Ollie Tanner. You've got Ollie Tanner, who's a Lewes player.
Yeah,
The
okay.
greatest sale that we've ever had at Lewes FC was to sell Ollie over to Cardiff. So you are welcome. He's doing well. I see some of his goals. They're very good goals. So
And he looks like a young man that's got a big personality as well.
Yeah, he's a very, very sound guy. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful man.
Fantastic. And yeah, do you know what I mean? It's kind of like we keep changing our managers, keep changing our players, and you lose a little bit of the identity. But the identity needs to go deeper than just the football as well, doesn't it? It's who are we as a club? What do we do for our
Mm,
community? How do we engage with those outside of the kind of playing field? And a football club has an opportunity to do a lot more than just play football. And I'm not sure how many of them kind of realise that and are doing work outside of the playing field. So when you went into Lewes FC, did you have all these kind of big ideas, or did you kind of get there and see what they were doing, and then try and translate them into real world kind of actions and activity
yeah.
in order to get there? And did you set like a 5 year plan? Kind of talk us through that process, getting there and going, right, this is how I'm going to do it.
Oh God. Well, I remember I had some ideas and then they were quickly smashed when I realized the reality, I think. Yeah, I think it's always, look, I think it's really, really good to have an idea of what you want to do before you go somewhere. Um, but I think you also need to be flexible enough to know that once you're in, you're going to realize that actually the priority is somewhere else. I think something that I found really helpful to me is working not necessarily about uh, like the outcome that you're trying to achieve, but more like the values that you're going to live whilst doing it. And I know that this sounds a little bit naff, but it's almost like I think an easier way for me to think is like with my values around like fairness or bravery or whatever it might be, like can I make sure that I'm living that principle of fairness, which is really, it means a lot to me to like live in a world that is fair. So I want to make sure that the club feels fair. And I guess that's where me and the club's focus on equality is like really chimes with me, but also bravery. I find bravery really, really important. So the club was obviously very brave. How can I help it to be brave? How can I use bravery myself? Like, I feel like when you come in, you might think that you're going to do this or this or this. But actually, I think you need to come in and go, I'm going to live by this and this and this, and then see what outcomes you can generate. I definitely had ideas. And when I came in, I realized that they were not the priorities. Even my job description was incredibly distorted from the reality. I don't think any of us realized that it would be quite so distorted, but I think that once I was in, I realized actually we need to get some foundations right. Because I think that there was the scope, there was the potential that we could be talking the talk, but not walking the walk. And so a lot of the work that I'm probably most proud of is actually the really boring grunt work of developing the processes, the policies, the culture, internal culture. Because I think it's one thing to talk the talk and be campaigning on some things, but if we're not actually really able to treat players or staff with basic things, like create a basic environment, then it just feels a bit hollow. So I feel like at the beginning when I arrived, there was lots to do, and it was not necessarily the campaigning externally, it was actually the let's get our own house in order internally first. So I think that was probably the biggest realization for me.
Fantastic. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's if you set your kind of moral, ethical compass in terms of this is what we want to do. Football changes, the world changes, do you know what I mean? And you're navigating a path that is not kind of certain. But if you've got that kind of moral compass and that's your guiding star, then wherever the kind of football or the world kind of takes you, you're still heading in the same direction, and having those processes and things in place make sure that you are kind of walking the walk, and that it's somebody sees that ethos on the ground and the people in there are living and breathing it, then it's authentic then, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? And no matter what kind of challenges you come up against, you can always kind of center yourself with, right, well, we do this right, and this is our kind of North Star in terms of our moral compass. We can figure out anything else along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably how I've realized I operate best, and it's probably how I would figure out who I want to work for or with. I think that when I also reflect back on some of the day-to-day challenges, some of your staff you work with really well and it feels like it gels really well. And then sometimes over the years, there might have been a staff member that I couldn't quite gel with, or we just kind of felt like we were always at loggerheads or didn't quite connect. And I think probably our values were just not aligned. And so what I felt was valuable, they didn't think was valuable, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that's not to say that that person is not valid or valuable. It means that actually I've got to modify the way that I'm incentivizing or working or collaborating, because just because I work this way doesn't mean that that's how everyone should be working that way as well. So yeah, I think that's been a good learning curve for me.
Fantastic. And what were the biggest challenges then going into Lewes, and kind of what you wanted to achieve? There's something that stuck with me since I came down to Lewes, a phrase that you used that I've mentioned to hundreds of people since, and they've gone, "That's a great way to sum it up. Pink it and shrink it."
Oh
Like, that's
yeah.
been a huge kind of challenge in women's football, where the powers that be go, "Oh yeah, it's for women. Make it smaller, put some pink on it, and that'll be fine." And
Mhm.
I've mentioned that phrase, like I say, to hundreds of people, and they've gone, "That's a really good way to sum it up." Was that one of the biggest challenges you faced? What other challenges did you face on that journey?
Oh, there's so many challenges, to be honest. Where to start? I think on the basic operations, football clubs live hand to mouth, more or less, and small clubs and independent clubs more than anyone else. So you are constantly scrapping and fighting to get partners, sponsors, increase your revenue, get a better beer on tap so that more people will drink it, extend the opening, whatever it is. You're trying to do so many things to just get a tiny bit more money in the coffers. Um, and that's honestly really hard, because it knocks on to who you can employ, for how long, how much certainty you're giving them. Is it a 3-month contract? You want to give them a full-time job, but you can only really give them a 1-year job, whether that's a player or whether that's a member of staff. It also means you can't really plan bigger picture. So, you can have your strategy, but to be honest, you don't know whether you can fulfill your dreams, because you're just trying to survive a lot of the time. You're living to the end of the season, and then you're looking at your budget and going, okay, what's in for next year and what's not. So I think some of the challenges were things like, I was proud to get our first long-term 3-4 year partners at a significant level, because that just gave us a tiny bit of leeway to know, okay, well, we've at least got that cash in the bank. Anything else we make is on top of that. So I think the financials are always going to be difficult for anyone working in a football club. I think the other challenge was trust with fans. I feel like in general, 99% of fans in and around Lewes are very, very happy. Love the club, proud of the club. But I think that with every football club, there's a small minority that are unhappy, and they will tell people 10 times a day that they're not happy, whereas the happy people don't post 10 times a day to say how happy they are. And so I think that some of those things are important, because you need to take note, because they are being vocal, they are expressing opinions. But then you also have to toe that line of going, hang on a sec, that's actually a minority view. It happens to be a vocal minority, but it's still a minority view. And look, this could be on the price of chips, or it could be whether you take on millions of pounds of investment. So you have to be really respectful of the feeling, the sentiment, the input, the identity that comes with all that, but also stay true to what you're trying to do. And so I think that, again, some of the things I'm most proud of are probably instigating the annual fan survey, which hadn't been done before, because then I literally had the data from everyone, well, from a good sample anyway, and not just from a small number of people. And then I could say, okay, well, it's clear that the toilets are just the worst things possible. So I'm really proud that we've, by the time I left, we built 2 new toilet blocks. And I think some people are like, why have you got so many toilet blocks? I was like, it's what you asked for. Or like a scoreboard, new scoreboards and things like that. But if you've got it written down, then you can plan around it. Whereas if a fan comes up to you at the game and says, I think it's terrible, they X, Y, Z, you have to figure out whether that's actually a held view or whether it's just that one individual.
Sponsored by Welsh Sports Fans and their award-winning Riverside Sports Bar, an American-style sports bar with a distinctly Welsh feel. Great food, great atmosphere, and all the sport, as well as a range of Welsh products at Wales' #1 sports bar.
I feel like the surveys, again, we did it public, we shared it publicly. We then in our fans forums, we would talk about it publicly. We would say what we were trying to do. You're just showing that you care deeply, you're listening, and you're doing, and it takes away any kind of like, I guess when I first arrived, and still to an extent, you'll still get people who go, I can't, I've written, I wrote in 2017 and said that I hated XYZ. And I'm like, yeah, but it's one email in 2017. I'm not asking you to write more times. I'm asking you to feed into the formal channel so that then I can formally like go about and do it. Anyway, that's getting a little bit niche, but I think, trust is a big one. The finances are always big, and then culture is always a big one. And I think that again, there were things that I think that when I arrived at Lewes, things looked a bit shinier on the outside, but on the inside, maybe some of the grounding work hadn't been done in terms of pulling people along in a movement, whether that was players, staff, fans, and so it was a little bit of discord. Can I say discord around some of the things that Lewes was saying or doing, and then whether people felt bought it in or not. And then I think on top of that, just culturally, even though it was Lewes FC, the men's side of the club was still operating the way that they'd always operated. And I think there had to be an approachment between the women's side and the men's side. And I'm really proud again of small things like, whole club meetings for the first time ever, where you'd have the men's players and the women's players together, talking to each other, like learning about each other and being respectful, and then brought in and going to each other's games. Because I think, again, when I first arrived, I heard this phrase of like, well, the women's team does the campaigning, let the men focus on the football. And I was like, absolutely not. So that was something that obviously then I shifted, because I think in this particular place, we underestimate men a lot. And a lot of those male players wanted to be involved in lots of the campaigns, lots of the community work, lots of the stuff that we were doing. And so, by the end of it, and today, if you look at, the Lewes FC socials, or like look at the community stuff that they're doing, the men are as invested as the women are, because they are involved and they have ownership and they care as much as the female players do. Loads. I mean, there's so many challenges. I could talk for 11 hours on them.
You see, I've done a little bit of work with Man City as well, and they've got a kind of equality policy up there, and the women parade their trophies at the men's game, the men parade their trophies at the women's game. Their marketing, they've got equal share across it, and it makes a difference. And if they're doing that level, hopefully that filters down through the other kind of levels of football. And you were doing it at the level with Lewes, and there should be more of that. There should be more collaboration between the men's and the women's teams, and because it's one club, isn't it? It's one club, it's one community. It shouldn't be like, oh, well, there's men's football, there's women's football. We're going to do things differently. You're going to get things differently. It's one club. It all should be together.
Yeah, and I think some of the fixes that you can do are really easy, quick fixes. They're things like Man City does this very well. Their website is very good. They've got a section on the men's team. They've got a section on the women's team. Most clubs up and down the country still have first team, and then under 18 boys, and then they'll have like the women's team. So the first team and the women's team. Even Jim Ratcliffe has been hauled over the coals recently for saying that, referring to the Manchester United teams that way. And it's so simple to just say men's team, women's team. It's simple, and small bits of language, representation on the website. Having a chair instead of a chairman. Those are the kinds of things that are actually relatively simple, quick fixes that any club can do. You don't have to be as big as Man City. You can be smaller than Lewes FC. So I think you're more powerful if you're greater than some of your parts. I'm not saying it's easy, because I also think that maybe some people in the industry are underestimating how hard it is to foster an entire new business strand of a business which is focused around women's football, rather than just the men's football side. You can't just give it crumbs in order for it to flourish. And I think that at the moment, there's quite a few people that think that by just throwing a little bit of money at the women's team, it should be performing better than it is, or they don't deserve any more. And I think that that's the wrong way to look at it. No good business plan starts with, when they're good, then we'll fund it.
Yeah, and I think this brings me back to that phrase, isn't it? Ping it and shrink it. We do men's football. We'll just do a cheaper, smaller, pinker version for the women, and then that'll be fine. You've got to think about it's a different audience. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
It's a different style of football. There's different positives, there's different negatives, there's different challenges, and you've got to give it its best opportunity for success by looking at it that way, rather than just going, well, there's a smaller, cheaper version with a
Yeah.
slightly with a little bit of pink on it, and then all the girls and women in the area are going to come running down because we've now got a women's team. It doesn't work that way, does it? What have you seen in the industry that kind of made you use that phrase, pinking and shrinking, and what more do you think could be done?
Yeah, I think the pink it and shrink it came from, I don't want to own it or take credit for it, because it's something that Laura Youngson from Ida Sports talks about. So she is also one of the co-founders of Equal Playing Fields. As we were climbing the mountain back in 2017, a couple of things happened. One, we didn't have any phone network. And so that meant that we had really good, deep and meaningful conversations with all these women from around the world. It was incredible. And one of the things that came out was the fact that we all hated our football boots. We'd never really thought about it, apart from the guys were piping up going, I've never even thought about my football boots. I put them on and then I just play. And the rest of us women were like, oh, hold on a sec. No, you have to break them in. So, it means that you're going to be in pain for this number of days. So you want to play with them on this game because it's not important, but then you need to rest and bring out your old boot. And then, because then you're going to get blisters, and then you're going to do that, and then you'll be fine. And they were like, no, no, that's not normal. And so we realized that, well, Laura realized that there was like a real thing in this, and that actually football boots have been designed for men's feet, which tend to be longer and thinner than women's feet that tend to be wider at the top part. And also the women carry weight slightly differently because of our hips. So that means that where the studs are placed on the sole of your boot should be slightly different, because you've got slightly different ways of carrying your weight. So she went to the industry, and the industry told, that was where the phrase pink it and shrink it came. So like the big guys, the big, sports apparel companies just had a policy of pink it and shrink it. You'll just make a smaller boot, make it pink, sell it to women. And so Laura disrupted that by setting up a football boot company called Ida, that have football boots that fit women. And funnily enough, the first time I had a pair of Ida boots, I put them on to go out to my game, and then I forgot about them. And then at the end of the day, I pulled them off, and I was like, oh God, I didn't even think about my boots the whole time I was playing in them. And I was like, oh, that must be what it's like to be a man. So yeah, she's created this business. It's now just actually got investment as well from Michelle Kang, one of the big investors in the into women's football right now. So it shows that there is development, but there's also showing that there's lots of women that are kind of rolling up their sleeves and going, okay, fine, I'll figure it out myself. I'll do it myself. If no one else is going to do it, I've got this great idea. I'm happy to give it to somebody else, but if they don't want it, then I'll do it myself.
Exactly, and yeah, there's a fantastic story there with Laura and Ida Sports and the boots, and yeah, I think that pink it and shrink it phrase was about the kind of apparatus of being created by the big companies, but at the same time, it's kind of an ethos, a bad ethos within football, a little bit, isn't it? Where it's kind of like, yeah, don't. It's the women. It'll just be cheaper, smaller, pinker, and then fine. Rather than going, okay, what is women's football? Who are the audience? What do they want? And how can we give that to them in a way that surprises them, engages them, excites them, and give it the best chance of success? So hopefully it doesn't need more people like Laura to go, right, I'll do it myself. Hopefully the players in the industry that have the big pots of money, that have all the resource, can go, hey, why don't we take another look at this, and when we'll look at it properly and see if we can make the best version of this for women and for women's football. Fingers crossed, we can hope.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and as long as Laura gets the IP and the money for it, and that she doesn't get just steamrolled by people that are late to the game. But yeah, no, it's just an ongoing challenge, isn't it? I think the more that we are having build outs of staff in a football club that look at the women's side, the better. I think that we shifted from a place where you didn't have any members of staff on the women's side, apart from maybe the coaching team. Then the next shift was you get 10%, 20%, maybe even 50% of someone in the marketing team or someone in the comms team. And I think what you really need is to be having the 100%, the department, the team that is just on the women's side. And then you've got the governance struggles of like, okay, now you've got this very professional team of people. How do you make decisions higher up in the governance side to make sure that these professionals are not going to get frustrated and go somewhere else because they're developing all these great strategies, ideas, innovations, but they get kind of stumped by it not being the right time or place, and the men's team need XYZ first, and then you can go out later. So yeah, it's actually a really, I don't want to downplay how complex it is, because I think it's one of the biggest challenges right now is how to have a big club like a Premier League or a Championship men's club have a fully functioning women's setup that is actually fulfilling its whole potential within the same club. I think it's a real challenge, and it's exciting to know what the lessons are going to be from that and who's going to do it really well.
Yeah, and over the last couple of years, the women's game has come on in leaps and bounds, and there's amazing work being done there. So hopefully that continues. Women's football continues to grow, and the opportunities for female players and women that want to work in football outside of the playing arena. Hopefully those opportunities continue to grow. So we've kind of gone across Lewes FC, a bit of equal playing field, talked through your career. Tell us about what you're doing now. You're the host of the Expected Goals podcast. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I co-host a podcast which is specifically on the business side of women's football. It's called Expected Goals, and it's with Matt Cutler, who is a sports journalist himself, used to work at Two Circles, big sports data agency as well. So the two of us chew over what's happening in the world of women's football, finance, business, what's happening in the media space. And it's going really well. We've had one series so far where we've had 12 episodes just before Christmas, the first half of this season. And I think one question we both had at the beginning was, will we have enough to talk about? And it's very, very clear that there is a lot going on week in, week out. So every week we talk about something that's been in the news, and then we talk about a topic. And then we also answer questions that have come in. And some of those questions have been brilliant. Things like, well, this might be of interest to you. Should Wrexham women play in the English leagues? On the women's side, don't worry, it's a very interesting deep dive into the history, the challenges, the fact that Gwalior United is a Welsh team that is women's Welsh team that is playing in the English leagues in Tier 3, and how it comes about, and what would be the possibilities, even if they wanted to, or even if they were good enough to do that. And then we had another question come in about, could my daughter make a living out of becoming a professional referee in women's football? So again, you just dig into the dynamics, the finances, and I think the questions we get in are my favorite bit. But actually, it's allowed us to look at a whole range of topics, all the way up from this media broadcast deal, what does it mean for women's football, all the way through to, like I say, things like referee salaries. So yeah, it's been fun, and I think Matt and I have a good blend of me being in the thick of it and knowing how the clubs function on a day-to-day basis, and him coming at it from hold on a second, the industry-wide data suggests that XYZ should happen, so that you've got a little bit of the practical and the theory all mashed up together.
Fantastic. It sounds like a great podcast, and yeah, I'm gonna tune in soon, and I'm gonna catch up on some of those episodes, because it's a really interesting space. And just to dive into the Welsh element a little bit, there's a very interesting conversation at the moment about whether Wrexham, Swansea, Newport and Cardiff should be able to play in the Welsh League.
Yes.
And then get access to the European spots, and then that's a whole minefield as well. So whether Welsh teams should play in England or Wales or both or none, or it's one of those conversations where there's lots of voices shouting from all different angles, and I don't know what the answer is. It's an interesting debate, that's for certain. So where can people find the podcast? Have you got a website? What platforms is it on? Where can they find out more?
Yeah, you can find it on Spotify, on iTunes. There's a nice, even if you just Google the Expected Goals and Podlink, you can usually find all the platforms there. So it should be relatively easy to find. And like I say, we tend to like sharing the feedback or the questions or thoughts that come in. So yeah, if people do end up listening, then they can definitely give us a shout, find us on social media, and we'll try and answer questions.
I'm going to think of a good question. I'm going to take a little bit. I'm going to think of a good question, and I'm going to throw it in there, see what you think. Fantastic. Thank you very much for kind of talking through your career and your thoughts on women's football and the podcast and everything else. And my final question is about what is next for Maggie Murphy. What next? What are you doing? How are you going to change the world for better next?
Well, it's all a bit TBC. I think that when I stepped down from Lewes, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, are you going to be, I've seen that job. Is that, are you going to be announced there or that?" And I was very clear and very open and very honest that I just needed some time out. Lewes is a brilliant place, but it took up a lot of my heart and a lot of my head, and so I definitely needed the time to step back. And so now at the moment I'm doing strategy work, so I'm advising a couple of clubs on bits and pieces, and helping them with their women's setup, but also just more broadly on the commercial or their strategy stuff. So I'm enjoying that. And honestly, it's a bit TBC. A little bit of me has this little edge to get back into a club. I love club football. I love women's football, but I also love men's football. I really enjoyed, overseeing the men's side of Lewes as well. Or maybe it's something completely different. But whatever it is, I know that it will be something meaningful, because I'm not very good at doing things that are not meaningful. So I'm not too sure. I'm excited to find out myself what that will end up being.
I'm excited too. I can't wait to see what you do next, and I'm sure it'll be something of epic proportions. You don't do anything by half.
Well, thanks, Dan. I wouldn't mind a slightly more rest time in the next job. So I'll just have to be better with boundaries, or we'll see. It'll be exciting, whatever happens.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today, Maggie Murphy. And thanks to those at home that are watching or listening. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast for new episodes. And make sure you go and check out Maggie's podcast as well, because I'm sure that's fantastic.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for having me.
Don't forget to like and share this episode and subscribe to the channel for more content.